Go ahead. The reason we start our tour out here is that because the outdoors was such a source of inspiration for Johnny and his stories that he wrote, the Raggedy Ann stories, and Andy stories, and also his comic strip that he did, his Tweedledee comic strip. And imagine, if you will, it's the year 1910, and all of this out here is just an apple orchard. You know, we only have a few remaining apple trees out here. But this is really just land. Most of these trees are not here. But the Silvermine River runs out there, and lots of rocks, of course. And so when Johnny started writing his stories, he really used the outside. Also because he was in part writing stories for his daughter, and she loves to play outside. So I'll back up for a minute. So 1910, Johnny's parents moved to the Silvermine area. They moved to a house further down on Mill Road. And Johnny's father was a painter, an impressionist painter, and so many painters and other artists were moving to the Silvermine area. So that's why his father relocated here. And his brother, Justin Gruelle, is also an artist, and he came here too. So Johnny came to visit. He at the time was living in Ohio with his family and 2 children then, Marcella, his oldest, and then a son. And he fell in love with the area and decided that he wanted to move here. But his mother, being a good mother, said to him, "That's lovely, Johnny, but you need to have a job before you move your whole family." So she had learned of a contest that the New York Herald newspaper was running for a comic illustrator, and she thought Johnny should submit an entry. And he did. He actually submitted 2 entries, and they both won first place. They tied for first place, so he was offered the job with the newspaper. And he actually did a comic for the New York Herald from 1911 to 1918, and it's a front-page comic, and of course back then it wasn't photographed in the newspaper, so it was for illustrators. So he moved the family to the Silvermine area. They lived with his parents while they built this house because he had seen this property and loved it. And while this was going on, they got to know the neighbors in the area, and among them was Solon Borglum, who was an artist in his own right, but who you may have heard his brother, his son, was the designer and sculptor for Mount Rushmore. So Solon had a daughter who was about Johnny's daughter's age. Her name was Marcella, which I just think is the sweetest name. And the two would play for hours and hours outside. And Solon had his own imagination, and he would tell them stories about fairies that lived down by the river. And there was one fairy in particular, Tweedledee, that he had created, who could appear and disappear at will. And at dinner at night, Marcella would come home and tell her family these stories that Mr. Bolton had told them. And so Johnny asked permission of Solon. He thought the whole idea of a fairy in a comic strip was a wonderful idea, and asked Solon for permission to use the character of Tweedledee in his comic strip. And Solon agreed, and so that's what the comic strip was that ran until 1918, when more war-themed comics were demanded, and so that's when we stopped doing it.
Wow.
Yeah. And around, we'll keep walking down here, in 1915, Marcella contracted an illness. We'll learn a little bit more about it inside. They're not quite sure. She had gotten a smallpox vaccination. They're not sure if it was an infected needle. It wasn't actually smallpox, but she got, I don't believe. But anyway, she was bedridden. And so to entertain her, her father would tell her these stories. And he used the fairies that he'd used in other stories. Marcel had lots of dolls, so he created these stories where these dolls come to life, and one of them was this rag doll, Raggedy Ann. And you can see sort of through here, there's a really big rock down by the river, and the children would call that the Wishing Rock. So Johnny incorporated that into some of the Raggedy Ann stories, the Wishing Rock, where the dolls would go, and the character of Marcella is actually in the Raggedy Ann books. And he would just entertain her for hours with these stories. And it was in 1915 when he published his first Raggedy Ann story, and I believe 1920 when he published the first Raggedy Andy story.
Remember my mother reading me those stories.
Yeah. It's funny because I remember reading the